Amen.
Well, the scriptures are filled with people who have served time in prison. Here are just a few of the names: Joseph, Samson, Jeremiah, Daniel, John the Baptist, Peter, James, John, Silas, and even Jesus himself, who was held in custody between his arrest and execution. But the most notable prisoner of them all had to be Paul, who even began referring to himself as a prisoner for Jesus Christ. And in 2 Corinthians, Paul tells the tale of what his life has endured, dealing with afflictions, beatings, hardships, imprisonments, and even riots. And he says, I labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger and thirst and have often gone without food. I have been cold and naked. Prisons in the ancient Near East were ominous dungeons haunted by severe darkness, congested with disease-ridden bodies. And scholars write that prisoners would often die in custody, either from starvation, because nobody would bring them food, nobody would show up. They die by suicide. They just couldn't take it. It was so dark and overbearing, they just took their own life by brutal torture, whether by guards or by other inmates or by disease. They get into a fight, they get a wound, it gets infected, and it ends up taking their life, or by execution. And the common belief of that day was that it would be better to die than to go to prison. And the only real chance of survival one could have while in prison was if some relative or friend would come with clothes, bringing food, water, and resources to refresh them. But in an honor and shame culture, the easier thing was to choose the path of indifference, letting them rot in the dark. And while in prison, Paul writes towards the end of his life to an emerging young pastor named Timothy. Paul adores Timothy, and throughout the scriptures, he refers to him as his own dear son. And the love was mutual. Timothy is now pastoring a church in Ephesus, and Paul wants to reinforce a value that is near and dear to the way of Jesus. And he tells Timothy, do not be ashamed of the gospel or of prisoners like me. Don't be ashamed of the good news. If you understand what the good news is about God's relentless pursuit of humanity, of every living being, whether they're in prison or not. And Paul wants Timothy to understand, if you don't get the gospel, then you're not going to come visit me. If you're ashamed of me, then you're going to be ashamed of the gospel. And then this letter in 2 Timothy, he's really writing and he's saying, who are you going to be, Timothy? What kind of church are you going to build, Timothy? And he continues on in chapter 1, and he gives Timothy some examples of the kind of church and the kind of person that he can be. He says this in verse 15, chapter 1, you know that everyone in the province of Asia has deserted me. Remember, Paul is in prison, including Phygelus and Hermogenes. Now, it just seems like two names. But what Paul is saying, hey, there's been some people who have been ashamed of the gospel, some people who have been ashamed of me because I am in chains. They've deserted me. They've left me. And he names two people. But these two names in Greek, they represent the bandwidth of everyone who has deserted Paul. The first person he says is the person Phygelus, which literally means fugitive. Paul's saying, you know, everyone who's deserted me, even the fugitives. Everyone's just been running away from me. The funny thing is when you read Burl Cain's book, it's called Cain's Redemption. He tells a story about how inmates come in for a long period of time, let's say 20, 25 years. And for the first 10 months to a year, family members start to show up. They start receiving the collect calls. But usually about the 10-month, 1-year mark, they stop coming. Or they make their trips a little bit more infrequent. And then, a few years later, a spouse writes a letter to the inmate saying, I need to get a divorce. The kids stop coming. The spouse is left. But if that inmate's lucky, they still got mama and dada who's going to show. But for many of them, the parents stop coming. A dad stops coming. But hopefully, mom keeps writing birthday cards, sending presents, sending gifts. But when she dies, that is when that prisoner is all alone. That's the breaking point for the prisoner. And in this moment, Paul's writing, he's saying, you know what? I was deserted. I had nobody to show up. No one. I recently had the chance to go to a prison. And I went and we were talking with this one guy. His name was Ricky, and he was amazing. Had a huge, huge heart. And we asked, hey, well, what's your family doing for Thanksgiving? And he said, you know, I don't have a family. Ever since I was 4 months, I was being shipped from foster care home to foster home to foster home. And this woman, Wendy Horton, looks at him and says, you've got a family. I will be your spiritual grandmother. And his eyes lit up, and he was like, I needed to hear that. For Paul, he's saying, everyone has deserted me. They've been like fugitives of grace. They have been running from me. And then he says there's another kind of person on the other side of the spectrum, Hermogenes. Those are people who have been born into privilege. They have all of these resources, all of this stuff that they have, and they could come and visit and feed me and clothe me, give me water, but they have chosen to do other things. From the fugitive to those with privilege, they have all deserted me. And Timothy, who are you gonna be? What kind of church are you gonna build, Timothy? One where you run away from the prisoners? One where you have all this privilege and you just neglect the prisoners? Who are you gonna be? What kind of church are you gonna build? My mom worked for the probation department in Ventura County, California. Her offices were connected to the courts and connected to the Ventura County Jail. And often I'd go see my mom, but I didn't walk in the jail. Kind of put my head down. Maybe I'd go sit in a courthouse and I'd watch trial lawyers, watch cases being done, walk into my mom's office. And I knew that there were some hard criminals that were coming through her offices, and I just looked the other way. And to be honest, up until 2 weeks ago, I had never stepped foot into a prison. And when I was leaving Stateville Prison, Stateville Correctional Center, a maximum security prison, walking past all of the barbed wire and the impenetrable concrete walls, walking back to the car, I started to think about the Department of Corrections. Their whole hope and dream and desire is to correct these inmates. And as I sat in this car and we're driving, we're leaving, there was something inside me where I felt the weight of my choices to never go to a prison. And you know what? I felt like Stateville Correctional Center corrected my heart. I mean, I've pastored at 3 churches. I've planted 1 church. I've studied the scriptures. I went to Bible college. And yet I know what Jesus says about prisoners. And to be honest, friends, I'm sorry. Because I didn't do what Jesus asked me to do until 2 weeks ago. And my heart got wrecked in that moment because just walking from cell to cell, listening to these stories, I understood why Jesus, why Paul had such a huge heart for prisoners. And I was ashamed of my own self because in many ways, by not going, I had been ashamed of the good news. Paul says, who are you going to be, Timothy? What kind of church are you going to build, Timothy? And then he points to another person. He says, I want to show you another way. I want to show you another way in which you can orient your life, orient your church, where you don't have to be ashamed of the gospel. He says this, may the Lord show mercy to the household of Onesiphorus, or what I like to say, one who is for us. Because he often refreshed me and was not ashamed of my chains. The two people, Phygellus and Hermogenes, one who was a fugitive, one who was born into privilege, but Onesiphorus, oh yes, this is the one who means bringer of good. I want to tell you, Timothy, about a guy who came, who wasn't ashamed of my chains. He refreshed me. And I imagine Paul being in prison and every day telling the jailer, you just wait, jailer, you just wait, guard, you wait, all you inmates, guess who's coming? The church is going to show up, man. And when the church shows up, man, you are going to see something so beautiful and so powerful. And then they didn't come. They didn't show up. But every day, Paul had to have that hope. And one day, Onesiphorus shows up. And I bet it gave so much life and energy to Paul. When I showed up to Stateville Correctional Center 2 weeks ago, I went with 3 people, Ann Rand, Tom, and Wendy Horton. And Tom Horton, you got to understand, he's probably in his 60s, got an amazing mustache, and he is awesome. And we walk into this prison, and there's got this one area called the F House. It houses about 1,500 prisoners. And these are like hardcore, maximum security, for life prisoners. And he walks in, and this whole prison, this F house, has been built in a circle with a watchtower in the middle so that the guards can just see what is going on in each of the floors of this prison. And Tom walks in, doors open, and this is what he yells, "Hallelujah!" And I'm looking over going, what are you doing? And he won't stop just screaming "Hallelujah," short for hallelujah. And he's like, "Hallelujah," and then all of a sudden, it's like a call sign, and there are people in different cells yelling it back. "Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah." And I'm like, what in the world? All of a sudden, you see all of these people from the DOC coming and hugging them. You see workers, you see inmates so excited to see them. And Ricky even talked. About when we came, there's just so much negativity in the place. But to see Tom and Wendy and Ann just leaning in, it just refreshed him. It gave him strength. We went to this area where some of these criminals had been put in solitary confinement. You couldn't even really see their face. All you could see was their hands. And there was one little gap where you could maybe look eye to eye. And Tom would hold one hand, and he'd be talking to this man with one eye looking through this little crack and just trying to tell him about God's love for him. And he still had chance and time to become a minister, a pastor, a leader in Stateville for God. And you wouldn't believe just how that encouraged and refreshed those prisoners and those inmates. Paul continues on to say, on the contrary, when he was in Rome, this is Onesiphorus, he searched hard for me until he found me. I mean, Rome's not a small city. And then this one bringer of good shows up to Rome and he goes, "Hey, I'm looking for Paul. He's a little overweight. He's loud. Every time he talks, he seems to get beaten. You know where he is?" No. Never heard of him. Don't know him. I don't know. Goes to another guy. "Hey, a little bit loud, fight. I mean, people get fired up. He incites riots. Oh, that guy? Oh, he's over there in that prison. He's over there." And this guy searched him out. Can you imagine what it would be like? Paul saying, who are you going to be, Timothy, if you and your church were a bunch of people who searched out the least of these? Who went and found them, did whatever you could to see them, to refresh them, to remind them of God's love? Who are you going to be, Timothy? What kind of church are you going to build, Timothy? And he says this, "May the Lord grant that he will find mercy from the Lord on that day. You know very well in how many ways he helped me in Ephesus." He says, "I pray, Timothy, that God will show mercy to Onesiphorus on that day." But what's that day? What's Paul talking about? Well, think about Jesus. Remember Jesus in Matthew 25? It's his last sermon. And in this last sermon, he begins to tell about when Christ returns. And there's going to be 2 groups of people. There's going to be what he calls the sheep and the goats. And on the right, he's going to put the sheep. These are the people who kind of understand the teachings of Jesus and live out the way of Jesus. And the goats, those who just don't. And the people begin, well, how do we know what you're all about? And Jesus says these words, for I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger and you welcomed me into my house. I needed clothes and you clothed me. I was sick and you looked after me. I was in prison and you came to visit me. And Jesus says on that last day, the people who have done those things, they're my sheep. They're my followers. See, for some of us, we don't think prisoners were a big deal to Jesus. This was his last message. And then let's think about when he gets arrested. He finds himself being brought out in front of a large crowd of people. And in that day, Pilate could bring another criminal and kind of put them up in front of the stage, and the people could vote which criminal could be released. And so Pilate takes the worst of them all. This guy by the name of Barabbas, he was a rebel. He started rebellions, these insurrections to take down the Roman government. And Pilate knows, if I bring Barabbas, they're not going to choose him. He's a thug. He's a bad dude. Jesus on one side, Barabbas on the other, and the crowd yells, give us Barabbas. And so Jesus has to go to the cross. I just started thinking about that, because the truth of the matter is we're all Barabbas. Jesus or me, Jesus or us. And Jesus goes, and we're set free. Prisoners released. Last message, basically last day on earth, someone gets freed, and then Jesus on the cross, and who's on the right and who's on the left? Prisoners. And the last person that Jesus invites into the way of paradise, into heaven, was a prisoner. When that prisoner said, would you remember me? And he says, I will remember you, and you will be with me in paradise. Friends, prisoners were a big, huge deal to Jesus. And Paul understands this, and he wants Timothy to get it, to know it, to not be ashamed of the gospel, and to not be ashamed of prisoners like Paul. Now, when Onesiphorus showed up, I imagine it gave so much life to Paul. I imagine that he stood up when Onesiphorus brought water and food and clothes, when he came and visited, when he incarnated Matthew 25, I imagine Onesiphorus speaking and Paul getting so excited going, see, the church showed up, jailer. See, the church showed up, guard. Hey, inmates, come, have some of this food. And I imagine he stood up and was not ashamed of the cross or ashamed of the gospel. I imagine that Paul was more fearless than ever. And he began to speak and preach because the church showed up. Who are you going to be, Timothy? What kind of church are you going to build, Timothy? And if you get to the end of Ephesians, and we've been in this Thrive series, what's so beautiful and moving to me is Paul simply says, pray for me. He's in chains here. That whenever I speak, words may be given to me so that I will fearlessly make known the mystery of the gospel, for which I am an ambassador in chains, and pray that I may declare it fearlessly as I should. See, there's a group of people who are ashamed of the gospel and ashamed of prisoners, and there's another group of people who are fearless for the gospel and fearless to go meet and see the prisoners. And I dream of a church where people are not ashamed, but they're fearless. And maybe the Spirit of God might be whispering to you, going, man, I relate with you, Steve. I have never been to a prison. And I want you to know we need help with visitation. Some of you, maybe the Spirit might be just tapping you on the shoulder to go visit one of the prisons. Or maybe for some of you, you might not want to step into a prison, but you're great with writing. There are a great need for pen pals. And you can learn more at willowcreek.org/nextsteps. We'd love for you to help us with this. But you have that choice. Ashamed or fearless. And I dream of a church that will be less fear, more grace, less fear, more love, less fear, more trust, less fear, more faith, less fear, more thriving. And so I just have to ask, who are you going to be, Timothy? What kind of church are you going to build? And who are we going to be, Willow? And what kind of church are we going to build? One that's ashamed or one that's fearless? It's my pleasure to introduce in a moment someone who is fearless, a man by the name of Warden Burl Cain. I can't wait for you to meet this man. Watch this video and then welcome him.
It was the bloodiest penitentiary in the nation. You had two types of people, predators and prey.
I did not apply for this job. I did not say, please let me go to Angola. I said, I don't want this job.
And since Warden Cain has come here, it's a different prison because it's different leadership.
I don't have any love for any man as great as I do for Warden Cain. And for a convict to say that he loves a warden is not going to win me very many fans. He has brought so much opportunity in this prison.
The legacy that I leave here is not bricks and mortar. The legacy we leave here is what's in the hearts of these men.
Morning, everybody. I've told you before that because of the Global Summit, I have the incredible privilege of interviewing some of the greatest leaders in the world: prime ministers, presidents, generals, business titans, rock stars, you name it. And I have never looked forward to interviewing someone more than the man sitting next to me, because he has done something that I don't believe any other human being has done. He has taken a hopeless, violent, bloody environment, and he has transformed it over 20 years. He's poured 20 years of his life into transforming Angola Penitentiary from just being a chaotic, dangerous bloodbath of a place to one of the most remarkable, civil, kind, safe environments of any prison in the United States. And a few years ago, I've heard his story. A few years ago, I got a note from him, and he said, I've learned that you mentor pastors all over the world. He said, I don't know that you know it, but we have 28 churches that function in Angola prison. 6,300 inmates. He said, we have 28 churches, and we had a seminary come in here, and these are trained pastors. They've passed 4-year seminary degrees, and they're building exciting churches. He said, now listen, I would like you to come and mentor my inmate pastors. I'm not asking you to preach. He said, frankly, some of these inmate pastors preach better than you do. And he said, but you have the ability to mentor the leadership side of them. And he said, if you'll come down, I would like to show you around the prison. I'd like to introduce you to all my inmate pastors, and I'd like to invite you to mentor them. So I go down there, and I meet all these inmate pastors, and I cannot believe my eyes. And these are sold-out Christ followers. These are incredibly committed pastors and associate pastors. And they ask the same kinds of questions that I get all over the world when I mentor pastors. And I walked around the prison, went to a combined worship service, and experienced one of the most powerful services of my life. And what's going on in Angola can happen all over the world, but it comes back down to leadership. And you're looking at one of the finest leaders in the world. Let's welcome Burl Cain. Now, first of all, Warden Cain, you had a decent life going on before you were offered this job in Angola. Everybody knew it was the worst prison in America. Why did you take the job?
Well, I didn't want the job. I told him I'm not going to that crazy place. I'm really doing well at this prison, and I don't want to go there. I'm too young to retire. We knew the warden there would fail in about 5 years, and you're the fall guy, so you're gone.
Yeah. But, I mean, you stepped up. Something had to...
Well, I got there, and I told him I'll take it temporarily, but only temporary, because I want to fall back to the prison where I was. I'd been at another prison for 13 years, so I'd been a warden a long time, but I knew what time it was at Angola. Don't go there. So I said, I'll go temporarily. But 3 months after I was there, I did an execution, and it had a profound impact on my life, and so I knew then I had to stay, because I knew we had to change it.
Yeah.
We had to have less victims.
And so one of the things that awakened in you pretty quickly, because of how terrible and violent things were at Angola, you said, I have to change the culture. Something has to change the culture and the hearts of these men, or they're going to kill everybody.
Well, what I did is, and a little bit about myself, I was raised in a Christian home. My mom and dad made me go to church every time the door opened, and as I said, they made me go because I didn't want to go. And when I went to LSU, I went crazy and had a good time. But I was having a good time at home. But anyway, I knew to call on God, and I knew I was out of my league, and so I would pray for wisdom, but I also realized that moral people don't rape, pilfer, and steal. So if I can change the morality of the place, then I can change the prison. And so that was, I think, divine intervention from God for me to even realize that, and so therefore, that's the direction I went.
So your deal was you could not hire enough people to work in the prison to keep it safe. You wanted internal moral rehabilitation, so you chose religion. Why did you choose religion?
Well, it was simple. In our culture, and particularly in the South, and I'm sure any culture, we found morality quicker in religion than anywhere else, and we coined the term moral rehabilitation. So everybody liked it, ACLU and everybody. They want you to be moral and they want you to rehabilitate. Well, we found that in religion quicker than anywhere else, so let's go after religion, any religion.
Yeah. So whose idea was it to invite a seminary to come in and start training people who might want to start churches?
Well, it wasn't mine. I can't really claim credit for changing the prison because I wasn't that smart. It was a divine intervention of God, and so I'm here crying about higher education because I am an educator. And I had taught school 3 months, and any school teachers here? We have to recognize you. We need to put our arms around you, and I'm going to tell you why. I taught school for 3 months, and I couldn't do it. I hated it. I hated it so much that I told the principal, I can't do this job, I'm not doing this. He said, well, if you quit this job, I'm going to see that you never teach again. I said, good, I'm out of here. So that was the end of teaching. So any of you teachers can run the penitentiary, I promise you. Anyway, I just launched off into this other direction, and so away we went.
So, but eventually you made an arrangement with this seminary, and you said, come in. Did you actually think that a bunch of inmates would sign up to want to take theology classes?
Well, I still wasn't on the right track yet because I just wanted higher education. We couldn't get Pell Grants for inmates, and being perfectly honest with you, here was a good way to get higher education, but I didn't really realize at that point that that would change the culture of the prison. But the people at the seminary did. And so they brought the seminary to the penitentiary, and we took off with the seminary, and the first thing we knew, we started seeing the culture change. People started carrying the Bible, and they turned to God, and it was 2 Chronicles 7:14 again. You know, God healed that was healing their land.
When did it first occur to you that some of these inmates that passed all the way through seminary were actually going to turn around and ask you if they could plant a church in there?
Well, it just kind of went with the territory because as they were going and learning to preach and they're going up and that's in the classroom, they were doing this deal and they had big congregations and they were training them to preach and speak and so forth and be public speakers. It was just a no-brainer and a natural thing. And certainly being a Christian myself, it was good for the prison, good for me, good for everybody, so let's just do it. So they wanted to have a church. We'll have a church.
And you have not only made it possible for them to plant all these churches, you actually helped raise money to put some church buildings on the prison property so all these 28 congregations could hold church services like we're doing today?
Well, it came to me that if I could build a church, that would be God's house. Wouldn't be a state house, because we wouldn't use tax dollars, and it would draw the people to the church because they were free in the church, because they're not in the prison, it's a church. And so that would help the attendance, so we started raising money to build the church, because we have to keep the separation of church and state. So no tax dollars can do anything for that seminary or for those church buildings, and you can't have a church in the kitchen. So it was easy to raise the money. So now we have 9 churches.
Yeah. And they hold worship services in there. I've been to them. They're absolutely extraordinary. And another thing that you did beyond allowing the planning of all these churches is you changed the actual culture, sort of inmate by challenging inmates into what you call a trustee program.
We did, and what we would do is if you'd been there 10 years and you weren't a sex offender and you didn't have any write-ups, then you could be a trustee, and then you could work in the jobs outside the fence, driving the tractors and so forth.